A dog took the bullet. A girl remembered everything. When rescuers found the girl in the woods, she was barefoot, trembling, and silent. Not a single word left her lips, not even when asked her name. She flinched at kindness, froze at touch. Beside her sat a German shepherd, his ribs heaving, eyes locked on hers like a sentinel. He was wounded, clearly protecting her. No ID, no history, just scars and secrets. But that wasn't the strangest part. She had drawn something over and over, a black van, a burned cabin, and a logo no one recognized. Until a retired ranger, Aidan Shaw, stepped in. This story isn't just about a girl who couldn't speak. It's about what she remembered, who she was running from, and the dog who refused to leave her side, even when bullets flew. What happened in those mountains was covered up, hidden, buried deep, until one child, one dog, and one broken man uncovered it all. And when she finally spoke again, it wasn't with fear, it was with fire. Frostpine was still breathing in mist when Aidan Rourke rolled out of bed. The morning air clawed through the log cabin's cracks like an old memory, cold, persistent, and not entirely welcome. Outside, the pines stretched skyward, heavy with last night's frost. Aidan poured hot coffee into a dented steel mug, listening to the creaks and groans of the timber around him. The world was quiet. Too quiet. He glanced toward the stone fireplace where Cairo slept, curled tight, his chest rising slow and steady. The German shepherd's coat had grayed around the muzzle in the past 2 winters, but his posture still carried that disciplined sharpness legacy of a life trained for danger. Like Aidan, Cairo was a soldier who had walked away from the battlefield, but never truly left it behind. Aidan took a sip, then crouched beside the dog. "Morning, old man," he muttered, running a hand along Cairo's back. The dog stirred, ears twitching, eyes opening amber and watchful. But instead of the usual leisurely stretch and trot to the door, Cairo froze. His body stiffened, nose lifted into the air. "What is it?" Aidan asked, but his voice fell flat against the sudden tension. In a blink, Cairo was up, shoulders squared, hackles rising, ears pinned forward. Without a sound, he bounded toward the front door and barked once, sharp and demanding. Then he threw himself at it with force. Aidan moved fast, instincts snapping awake. "Hold up!" he called, grabbing his jacket and rifle, heart beginning to race. Cairo pawed at the latch, something urgent and primal in his movements, far from his usual measured obedience. The door opened, and the cold hit them both like a slap. But Cairo was already gone, a black streak vanishing into the frost-painted pines. No hesitation, no backward glance. Aidan swore under his breath and took off after him. The woods were not forgiving this morning. Patches of frozen mud cracked beneath Aidan's boots. Tree branches slapped against his face and arms as he pushed through, following the deep gouges Cairo's paws left in the snow. The scent of pine sap and old earth clung to every breath he took. But there was something else beneath it, a tension he couldn't name. He couldn't remember the last time Cairo ignored a command. Even after retiring from military service, the dog had remained faithful, measured, calm. But this was a different animal. Something in Cairo had snapped awake. Aidan ducked under a bent tree limb and pressed deeper into the forest, memories tugging at the edge of his focus. Years ago, he'd seen this same expression on Cairo's face in the middle of a collapsed compound in Kandahar, bodies everywhere, the world burning. Cairo had found survivors no radar could detect, had saved Aiden more times than the man could count. They'd both left parts of themselves in that desert, but the bond forged in that hell had never faltered. Until now. Now it felt like Cairo was being pulled by something neither of them could explain. Aiden paused on a ridge and called out sharply, "Cairo!" No answer. Only the wind responded, threading through the trees like a whisper. He pressed on. The path narrowed between two ancient firs, roots coiled like serpents along the ground. And then he heard it. A whimper, soft, fragile, not canine. Aiden stopped in his tracks. Another whimper, then a low, steady growl. He stepped carefully over a cluster of mossy rocks, heart pounding in his chest, and looked down. Beneath a fallen tree, in a hollow half buried by pine needles and frost, was Cairo. He lay close beside a small, motionless, shape protective, alert. As Aiden crouched, the scene became clear. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 8 years old. Her limbs were twisted unnaturally beneath her, bruises scattered along her pale arms and face. A tear in her jeans revealed blood-caked skin. Her lips were cracked, fingers clenched tightly into her sides, as though trying to hold herself together. But what broke Aiden was her expression blank, empty, as if whatever light had once lived behind those eyes had been drained out and scattered to the trees. Cairo didn't move when Aiden approached. He simply pressed his body closer to the girl, his ears back, but his eyes pleading. Aiden knelt beside them both, dropping his rifle. "Oh, God." His hands hovered for a moment, unsure where to begin. Finally, he touched her shoulder gently. She flinched violently, but her eyes didn't open, still breathing. "Cairo," Aiden whispered, voice cracking. "You found her." The girl stirred faintly as Aiden slid his arms beneath her. She was feather-light, frighteningly cold. As he lifted her, she let out a small cry, not of pain, but of something deeper. Her arms fumbled weakly outward, then wrapped around Cairo's neck. She clung to him with everything she had. Aiden swallowed hard. He knelt there a moment longer, the snow beginning to fall again soft, delicate flakes drifting down like a hush from the sky. The forest was still, and for the first time in years, Aiden felt something other than numbness settle inside him. Purpose. He cradled the girl close, pressing her head gently against his chest. Cairo rose and walked beside him, eyes never leaving the child. They headed back toward the cabin, step by slow step. The silence between them said more than words ever could. The forest had always been a place of silence for Aiden Rourke, a vast cathedral of wind and bark where he could breathe without apology. But this morning, the trees didn't feel like sanctuary. They loomed like sentinels, watching him chase after something he didn't yet understand. Cairo's paw prints carved a direct line through the underbrush, deep, purposeful. Whatever had pulled the old shepherd from sleep and into urgency, it hadn't faded. If anything, the further they went, the more relentless the trail became. "Cairo!" Aiden called again, his voice hoarse from cold and worry. No answer, only the whisper of branches brushing against each other, a brittle song of winter stillness. This wasn't normal, not even close. Cairo had once been able to distinguish the scent of a single soldier beneath rubble soaked in diesel and blood. He'd tracked the heartbeat of a buried child through walls of cement. He didn't act on instinct alone, he acted on certainty. But what terrified Aiden wasn't the urgency, it was the disobedience. The dog wasn't responding to any command, verbal or nonverbal. He wasn't circling back, wasn't hesitating. He was being pulled by something ancient and absolute, something more than just smell. Aiden ducked beneath a low-hanging cedar branch, frost brushing against his face like cold fingers. His boots skidded against slick moss. The terrain deepened into a gully, a gash in the land formed by years of runoff and storm. He pressed on, teeth clenched, rifle bouncing against his shoulder, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. There were things Aiden didn't speak about, things buried so deep in him that even the cold couldn't reach them. But here, alone in the wild, chasing after a creature who had once dragged him out of a collapsed compound in Kandahar, the memories returned. He saw blood on sandbags, saw fire curling into a blackened sky, saw Cairo's body limp for one horrifying moment before he stood again, bleeding but alive, and kept moving until they found the last survivor. They'd been the last two out of hell, and since that day there had been a silence between them, a knowing. They didn't need words. They had war. They had scars. Now, Aiden wasn't sure which of them had carried the other longer, but he knew this. Cairo had never failed him, not once, and that's what made this moment unbearable. The trail grew erratic, zigzagging around fallen logs, dipping beneath dense groves where the snow hadn't melted. Every few minutes, Aiden would spot a shred of fur caught on bark, or the imprint of claws turning sharply into a slope. Cairo wasn't chasing something. He was leading. But to what? Aiden slowed his pace, breath fogging around him. He listened. Then, just ahead, a faint growl, low and primal. He pushed forward, crashing through brush with reckless speed. As he crested a ridge, he caught a glimpse of Cairo. The dog stood rigid, tail low, ears forward, body taut as wire. And his eyes, they weren't on Aiden. They were fixed on something buried in the trees below. Aiden dropped into a crouch beside him. "What is it, boy?" Cairo gave no response. Only a deep, rumbling sound, barely audible. Then Aiden heard it. A sound like breath, small, wet, human. He turned his head slowly. There, half hidden beneath a tangle of broken roots and pine needles, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 8, filthy, bruised, her arms curled in a defensive knot around her chest. A smear of dried blood darkened her forehead. Her hair, once blonde, was caked with dirt. Her lips moved soundlessly, no words, only tremors. Cairo took a cautious step forward and stopped, then lowered himself until his belly touched the ground. The girl's eyes flicked open. They landed on Aiden, then on Cairo. And something in her changed. The fear didn't vanish, but it shifted, softened, as though a lifeline had appeared in the form of a four-legged shadow. When Aiden moved, she didn't flinch, but when Cairo took one more step toward her, she reached out with trembling fingers and grasped a clump of his fur like a drowning child reaching for driftwood. And that was when Aiden knew. This wasn't an accident. Cairo hadn't just stumbled upon her, he had known. Aiden knelt beside them both, heart thudding. The girl didn't speak, didn't cry, but she held on to Cairo as if he were the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. "She's alive," Aiden whispered, more to himself than anyone. "You brought me to her." Cairo's eyes met his for a brief second, and in them Aiden saw it. Something ancient, something more than training, more than instinct. Call it memory, call it purpose, call it grace. It didn't matter. Cairo had followed it and found her. The forest, in its frozen stillness, bore witness. The smell of damp pine and decaying bark clung to the air as Aidan crouched beside the hollow where the girl lay. It wasn't a hiding place. It was a grave the forest hadn't finished yet. The gnarled roots of a fallen tree arched over her small frame like the ribs of something long dead, shielding her from wind but not from cold. Frost had begun to settle on her skin. She couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds. Her tiny fingers were curled into fists, blue at the knuckles, lips chapped raw. A dark bruise bloomed across her cheek like a shadow someone tried to scrub out. One of her socks was missing. A thin, torn jacket barely clung to her frame. She wasn't asleep. She was slipping. And Cairo was lying beside her like a sentinel, carved from shadow and breath, his flank pressed tightly against hers to share heat. His eyes lifted when Aidan moved closer, but he didn't growl, didn't shift. He simply watched, breath slow and steady, heart beating for both of them. Aidan swallowed the lump forming in his throat. He had seen children like this before, in villages caught between crossfire, in tents lined with makeshift beds and morphine. But this was supposed to be different. This was Granite Hollow, the place he had come to forget. Yet here she was, and she was real. Hey, little one," he said gently, his voice low as the wind through pine. "It's okay. I'm here. Cairo found you. You're safe now." No response. Only the faintest tremor of her chest rising and falling, erratic and shallow. He reached out slowly, fingers careful not to startle her, and touched her forehead. Ice. Her skin was ice. "Damn it," he muttered. "She's freezing." He shed his jacket without thinking, wrapping it around her small body. She didn't flinch, but her head lolled slightly to the side, and Aidan could see it now marks. Not just bruises, ligature marks, faint red circles around her wrists, half-healed, a welt across her collarbone. It wasn't just exposure that brought her here. It was escape. "I've got you," he whispered, sliding one arm beneath her knees, the other under her shoulders. But as he began to lift, something unexpected happened. The girl stirred, and her hand, ghostly, pale fingers, stiff-sought Cairo blindly in the air. When it touched his fur, she latched on with surprising strength, curling her fingers tight into his coat. No, sweetheart," Aidan tried softly. "I need to carry you." But her body tensed. Eyes fluttered open, cracked with panic, and she let out a sound that wasn't a word, wasn't even a scream. It was a breathless sob, animalistic, desperate. And still, she didn't look at him, only at Cairo. Her eyes, wide and fractured with fear, locked onto the German shepherds. And in that moment, Aidan wasn't the rescuer. Cairo was. The dog lowered his head, pressing his muzzle gently against her forehead. No bark, no whine, just presence. And slowly, the girl's breathing calmed. Her grip didn't loosen, but she stopped resisting. Aidan adjusted his arms, lifting her carefully jacket and all without breaking her fragile connection to Cairo. And Cairo moved with them, one paw step at a time, always within reach. Together, they climbed out of the hollow. The forest stretched long and quiet around them. Nothing but the sound of snow crunching beneath boots and paws. The girl's head rested against Aidan's chest, but her hand, her fragile, stubborn little hand remained, curled in Cairo's fur the entire way. Aidan didn't speak. There was nothing left to say, only a silent promise in the rhythm of his stride. You're not alone now. The cabin door creaked open with the weight of two realities, the one Aidan had chosen when he left the world behind, and the one he'd just carried in his arms. Wind swept through the doorway like a final whisper from the woods before he shut it out. He stepped inside. The heat from the wood stove was low but alive. Aidan crossed the threshold and gently laid the girl down on the cot near the fire. Cairo followed, padding silently, then curled into a protective half-moon at her feet. She reached for him before her eyes even opened. Still no words, just touch, just breath, just survival. Aidan moved quickly but carefully, training taking over even if his heart was still raw. He set a kettle on the stove, found the old first aid kit from the cabinet, and knelt beside her. "All right, kiddo," he murmured. "We're going to get you warm. Going to clean you up a bit." She didn't flinch when he touched her wrist, but she didn't meet his eyes either, just stared somewhere past him, through him, like he was made of smoke. Her skin was like paper, pale and marred. The bruises had turned colors, deep plum, fading yellow, angry green. Some were fresh, some weren't. His fingers paused over the mark on her collarbone. A belt? A rope? He forced himself to keep moving, gentle, methodical. "Sorry," he said under his breath every time she winced. Sorry for the world. Sorry for what someone did to her. Sorry he hadn't gotten there sooner. When the kettle hissed, he poured the warm water into a bowl and wrung out a clean cloth. He dabbed her forehead, her cheeks, wiping away the grime of bark and dried blood. Still no sound. Not a sob, not a question, not even the hint of a name. But when Cairo shifted slightly beside her, she moved, two-hand fisting into his fur like an anchor. That's when he knew. He leaned back on his heels and exhaled, watching her, not as a ranger, not as a soldier, but as a man who had once been shattered and found by a creature just like Cairo. She had no name, no language, no clue how she'd ended up in that hollow beneath the tree. But somehow the dog had reached her, and that was enough, for now. "Little doe," he said softly. The girl blinked, but her eyes didn't leave Cairo. "Just until we find out who you really are. You move like one, quiet, watchful, still halfway in the wild." He didn't expect a response, but for a heartbeat. Her fingers tightened around Cairo's coat, like the word had landed somewhere in the fog. He opened his old field notebook, dog-eared and stained from years of mountain weather, and began scribbling with his usual blunt pencil. Time recovered, 6:18 a.m. Location, west quadrant near Pine Ridge. Coordinates logged. Subject, approx. Female child, Estes 8 years old, bruised, hypothermic, found unconscious in hollow beneath fallen tree. No ID, no shoes, no verbal response. Initial designation, Little Doe. Signs of restraint, wrist ligatures, trauma to face/arms. Will notify local authorities once vitals stabilize. Condition guarded. He paused, then added, dog-led recovery. Cairo initiated contact. Would not leave her side. He stared at that line for a moment, then underlined it twice. The room felt heavier than usual. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, as if the forest was still trying to say something. Aidan rose, checked the firewood, and stoked the flames higher. The glow pulsed across the cabin walls like heartbeat shadows. He glanced back at her, still unmoving, still silent, but breathing, always breathing. He made her a cup of warm honey water. Didn't ask her to drink, just placed it nearby. Left space, like you would with an injured animal. No sudden movements, no questions too soon. Cairo never left her side, not even to eat. The kettle hissed again, the minutes stretched, and then, so small he almost missed it, she shifted. Her head turned, eyes opened wider, and for a single second she looked at Aiden, not past him, not through him, at him. It wasn't a look of trust, but it wasn't terror either. It was the look of someone who wanted to believe in safety, but had no proof it still existed. "You're okay here," he said softly. "I promise." She said nothing, but her fingers never let go of Cairo, and that was enough for tonight. The night settled over the ranger station like a heavy blanket, silent, dark, and pressed down by snow clouds. Aiden sat alone by the dying fire, staring into embers that cracked softly with the weight of memory. His hands, still calloused from years in the field, were steady, but his eyes flickered toward the door of the back room where the girl slept. "Little Doe," he whispered to himself, not as a name, but as a question the world hadn't answered yet. Cairo lay by his feet, ears twitching in half-sleep. The quiet was not peaceful. It was waiting. Then it shattered. A scream tore through the cabin, raw and unfiltered, a sound that had no words, just terror distilled into a single primal cry. Aiden was on his feet instantly. Cairo was faster, leaping up, claws skidding on wood, charging down the short hallway. Aiden flung the door open a heartbeat later. She was sitting up in bed, trembling, eyes wide and vacant, breathing like she'd surfaced from drowning. Her fists clutched the blanket, but her body recoiled as if unseen hands still reached for her. "No, no, no," she whimpered, voice cracking but incoherent, as if the syllables weren't language, just instinct. Then Cairo nudged the bed. Just one nudge. The moment she saw him, her chest collapsed in relief. She dropped the blanket, fell forward, and wrapped both arms around the dog's neck. And just like that, silence. Not calm, but silence. The kind of silence born from clinging to the only thing left between you and whatever haunted your dreams. Aiden didn't speak. He stood at the doorframe, breathing in slow control, watching, thinking. The scream still echoed in his ears, but more than that, the terror behind it. It hadn't been the dream of a child afraid of the dark. It was the scream of someone who had seen darkness wear a face. Cairo shifted slightly beneath her, letting her lean deeper against him. Her fingers tightened around his fur like she was grounding herself, like if she let go she might disappear back into wherever she'd just come from. Aiden stepped forward slowly. No sudden moves, no questions, just presence. He sat on the floor beside the cot, careful to keep a respectful distance. The firelight from the hallway cast a dim orange halo around them. "I'm here," he said gently, voice a low gravel whisper. "No one's going to hurt you." She didn't look at him, but she wasn't shaking as hard anymore. Cairo exhaled, slow and deep, his breath rising in the cold air like fog. He nudged his head into her arms again, anchoring her. Aiden watched them both, and something in his chest shifted. Not pity, not even anger, but awareness. This wasn't over. Whoever had done this to her, wherever she had come from, they might still be out there, and they might be looking. He stood again, moved quietly to the window, pulled the curtain aside with 2 fingers. The forest outside was black, the kind of black that swallowed sound. Snow fell in hushed spirals, dusting the porch and the pine boughs like ash. He scanned the tree line, nothing moved. Still his gut itched. He knew that feeling. He'd felt it overseas, crouched in sand with a rifle across his chest. He'd felt it the night Cairo was injured, lunging in front of him during a raid that went sideways. It was the feeling of being watched by something that had not yet moved. Aiden checked the front door. Locked. Then the rear exit. Bolted. He laid his hand on his shotgun, leaning near the coat rack, just long enough to remember where it was. Then he returned to the girl's room. She was lying down now, curled beside Cairo, her face buried in his neck. Only her eyes were visible, barely open, watching Aiden not with trust, but with a desperate, exhausted kind of alertness. "I'll keep the fire going," he said gently. She blinked once. It felt like the closest thing to a thank you she could give. Later that night, Aiden didn't sleep. He sat near the fireplace again, the dog tags around his neck clinking softly when he shifted. He opened his notebook and with slow strokes added to the day's log 12:43 a.m. Subject awoke in terror. Incoherent scream. Physical symptoms: sweating, rapid heart rate, fight-flight response. Calm restored upon presence of Cairo. No verbal explanation. Suggests trauma-linked triggers. Will maintain overnight observation. Hypothesis: threat may still be active, must remain alert. Outside, snow continued falling, thick and soundless. Inside, the cabin held 3 lives suspended in fragile, flickering quiet. The girl clung to Cairo like he was the only thing left in the world that hadn't broken her. And maybe, Aiden thought, he was. Morning filtered through the cabin windows in pale streaks, painting the floorboards in chilled light. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a fragile, calm snow, resting like a breath held too long. Inside, the girl sat on the floor near the hearth, knees pulled to her chest. She hadn't said a word in 2 days, but she stayed close to Cairo, her hand always touching some part of his fur, like it tethered her to the present. Aiden moved quietly around the cabin, making breakfast with the kind of deliberation that came from long deployments and long silences. He didn't speak unless necessary, didn't push. He knew trust was earned slowly, if at all. Cairo dozed at her side, one eye lazily half open, rising whenever Aiden stepped too far. A quiet guardian. Then came the knock. Firm, rhythmic, 3 raps. Aiden froze, spatula midair. The girl's head jerked up, body tensing before her mind even processed. "Stay here," Aiden said softly. She didn't move. Her fingers gripped Cairo's fur tighter. He walked to the front door and opened it a crack. Standing on the porch was Deputy Lang. Mid-30s, heavy coat with the county sheriff's star stitched cleanly over the heart, radio on his belt, boots caked with forest mud. "Morning," Lang said with a nod. "Heard you had a call in. Lost kid?" Aiden stepped out, pulled the door closed behind him halfway. "Found her yesterday. No ID, no name. Looks about 8. Lang scratched the back of his neck. "Mind if I come in? Might help if she sees a badge. Kids usually trust a uniform." Aiden's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's skittish." Lang gave a good-natured shrug. "Won't press. Just want to make sure you're covered. If it's what I think it is, we might be dealing with more than just a lost camper." That gave Aiden pause. He opened the door. "All right, but slow." The moment the badge crossed the threshold, the cabin changed. It was visceral, like a ripple of heat in a frozen room. The girl didn't scream, not at first, but her body launched backward, scrambling across the floor with her heels, knocking over the tin cup beside her. Her mouth opened. Air sucked in, too fast, and she let out a cry so sharp it pierced the quiet like glass shattering. No! No, please, no! She clawed backward toward Cairo, eyes locked in terror on the gold badge pinned to Lang's chest. Lang froze, hands up. Whoa, whoa, hey now! But she didn't hear. She couldn't. Her panic drowned out the world. She thrashed, trying to crawl under the cot, her body reacting with blind desperation. Then Cairo stepped between her and the deputy. A silent shield. He didn't growl, didn't lunge, just stood there still and unmoving, his large frame blocking her completely from view. And in that moment, something inside her broke and latched all at once. She threw her arms around Cairo, buried her face in his neck like she was choking on air, and finally breathed. Aiden moved quickly. Lang, step out. Now! The deputy backed out, eyes wide, confused. Outside, Aiden pulled the door closed behind him, his voice low but sharp. She's terrified of law enforcement. Lang ran a hand over his jaw. You think, what, abuse? I don't know yet. But she didn't flinch at wolves or snow or bleeding hands, just that badge. Lang looked down at his chest, the symbol stitched over his heart, suddenly feeling heavier. Jesus, he muttered. Back inside, the girl hadn't let go. Cairo lay beside her now, his body curled around her trembling frame. She clung to him like he was the last thing in the world not tied to pain. Aiden knelt a few feet away. You're safe, he whispered, more a mantra than a promise. He's gone. No one's going to take you, not from here. She didn't answer, didn't look, but she blinked, once, twice. That was enough. He stood, crossed to the logbook, and scribbled with steady hand, Observation. Strong, violent fear response triggered by uniformed officer and visible badge. Subject exhibited physical signs of trauma, screaming, fleeing, dissociation. No verbal recognition of officer reaction seems generalized to law enforcement. Hypothesis: past trauma linked directly to uniformed authority. Immediate course of action: no uniformed contact until further trust is established. Cairo remains only stable anchor. He underlined the last line twice. That evening he cooked her something warm, a soft stew, light on seasoning, thick with root vegetables and broth. She ate in silence but didn't flinch when he handed it to her. Progress. Cairo never left her side, and when Aiden cleaned the dishes, he saw her watching him, just for a second, just enough. A spark of awareness, a flicker of maybe. But when night came, and the shadows stretched long across the cabin walls, she whispered her first word since arriving. So quiet, he barely heard it. Cairo. Not thank you, not help. Just that. A name, a lifeline. And it was enough to break something in Aiden he hadn't known was still there. The morning came gray and quiet. Aiden lit the stove slowly, letting the kettle hum, watching the frost melt off the window in thin veins. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But the silence wasn't heavy like before. It felt poised, like something was shifting. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside Cairo, still in the oversized flannel shirt Aiden had found for her. Her small hands moved slowly, mechanically turning over the crayons he'd left on the table the night before. Not choosing, just feeling them, color by color. Then she picked up the black one and began to draw. At first, Aiden didn't notice. He was reviewing the incident notes from the Ranger Network, compiling the official report without any identifying info. but something about the movement of her hands' small, careful strokes pulled his attention. She wasn't just scribbling, she was remembering. He crossed the room slowly, crouched beside her, careful not to intrude. The paper trembled in her lap, and her grip was too tight for a child just playing. But she kept going. One window, barred, a door, slanted, like in a basement. A figure, tall, all in black. But where the face should have been, she shaded nothing. Just void, a blank oval. Aidan felt a chill begin to climb his spine, not from the cold. Then came the cage. It was small. The lines crossed one another tight and jagged. Someone was inside it. The form was curled up, tiny limbs drawn to a center like a ball of silence, her own silhouette. She was drawing herself. She didn't look up, didn't ask permission. But when she set the crayon down and held the paper out to him, her hands shook. Aidan took it gently. His throat tightened. She wasn't just afraid of something abstract. This was real. A place. A man. A prison. Aidan studied every detail like it was a map to a land where monsters wore human skin. He swallowed hard, forcing calm into his voice. "Is this where you were?" The girl didn't answer, but her chin dipped a fraction. Not quite a nod. More like her body wanted to hide, but knew it couldn't. Aidan felt something ancient stir inside him, not rage, not yet, but vow. He folded the paper like evidence and tucked it into the case file. Then he returned to her side, not as an officer or a ranger, but as something quieter, something more sacred. "I don't know who did that to you," he said gently, "but they're not here now." She blinked, her eyes still glassy with memory. "And they won't ever touch you again. I promise." There was a long silence. Then Aidan reached into the first aid box and pulled out a patch, just a small piece of gauze. He held it up between them. "I think you deserve something." Her brow furrowed, unsure. He gently tore a corner of the gauze and picked up a pen. With steady strokes, he wrote one word. "Ivy." He held it out to her. "For now," he said, "just until you're ready to tell me your real name. Or not. Either way, you're safe here, Ivy." She stared at the word. Something flickered behind her lashes. Not quite recognition, but not rejection either. After a few seconds, she reached out and took the patch, pressed it to her chest like it had weight, and nodded. From the other side of the room, Cairo thumped his tail once. Aidan glanced at him, then back at the girl. No, at Ivy. "I think he approves." She almost smiled. Almost. But in the space between fear and trust, something had shifted. That night, Aidan added to the report, but didn't file it. Subject: Ivy, temporary name, communicated via drawing. Crayon image reveals isolated cabin, barred window, cage, and an adult male figure without discernible facial features. Emotional indicators suggest prolonged trauma and captivity. Physical signs corroborate bruising, malnourishment, emotional withdrawal, severe reaction to uniformed authority. Will continue observation. No law enforcement contact unless urgent. Priority, stability, trust. He stared at the last line for a long time, then added one more. Cairo remains sole emotional bridge. Without him, she unravels. With him, she breathes. Outside, the woods whispered under fresh snow. But inside the cabin, for the first time, The girl who had no name had claimed one, even if just for now. And Aiden knew, whoever had hurt her, wherever that dark cabin was, this was no accident. She hadn't just survived. She had escaped. And somewhere out there, the thing she feared, the man with no face, might be looking to pull her back. The thaw had come early this year. Snow melted off the pines like secrets dripping from a conscience. The forest floor was no longer white and silent, but damp, disturbed. Aiden noticed it in the way the wind moved through the trees, restless, as if something buried beneath the earth had started to stir. That morning, Ivy stood at the door before sunrise, fully dressed, waiting. She didn't speak, just reached down and brushed her fingers across Cairo's thick fur, then looked up at Aiden with a kind of quiet insistence that didn't need words. She wanted to go somewhere. Aiden hesitated, scanning her face. No fear, no panic, just urgency. He nodded once. All right, let's follow. They moved beyond the cabin's perimeter, across the ridgeline where the trees opened like ribs into a narrow creek bed. Cairo walked ahead, nose to the ground, but kept checking over his shoulder. Ivy trailed behind him like a shadow, quiet, but precise. Every step she took felt familiar, as if her body remembered this place, even if her voice didn't. They followed the stream until it forked one side dry and tangled with brush, the other bending sharply into a hollow. That's where she stopped, her hands curled into fists. She pointed at the earth, then dropped to her knees. Without hesitation, she began clawing at the wet soil, fingers sinking into the mud. Her breaths came shallow. This wasn't random. She knew. Aiden knelt beside her. Ivy, what is this? Still no words, just digging. Cairo stood still now, ears alert, nose twitching at something beneath. Then Aiden's glove struck metal. Not much, just a glint. But it was enough. He reached in deeper, pulling until something cold and rusted came free from the dirt. It was a bracelet, military issue. The band was twisted with age, but the tag was still legible under grime and moss. Aiden rubbed it clean with his thumb. 2 words were etched into the plate, just above a government serial number. Quinn, Project Monarch. His stomach turned. Quinn? He whispered, staring at the tag. Ivy froze. Her eyes were locked onto the name like it burned. Her hands trembled. She backed up, slowly, clutching Cairo's fur. Aiden could feel it now, something dangerous pressing in through the trees. Not physically, but in the air. A tension that felt radioactive. Wrong. He'd heard whispers before. Quiet stories that circulated through ranger stations and off-grid channels. Project Monarch always in half sentences, redacted files, and suddenly missing informants. Something to do with mind control? No one ever said the same thing twice. But one thing was consistent. No one who looked too closely ever came back the same. Ivy, he said gently, rising to his feet. This bracelet, you've seen it before? She didn't nod, but she didn't deny it either. Instead, she reached out with a muddy finger, pointed at the name, then slowly touched her own chest, not as if she was Quinn, but as if Quinn had mattered. Aiden's throat tightened. Was Quinn someone who helped you? Her lips parted. Just a breath, then closed again. Whatever happened here, Quinn had been with her, and now Quinn was gone. Cairo let out a low growl, not hostile, just alert. Something had shifted. This wasn't just a case of abuse or abandonment. This was a burial, not just of bodies, but of truth. Aidan wrapped the bracelet in a handkerchief and slid it into his field pack. He glanced down at Ivy, who now sat beside Cairo, her eyes locked on the stream as if it might carry the ghosts away if she stared long enough. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I promise you," he said, voice firm, low. "Whatever this is, I'm not turning away." Ivy didn't respond, but when he turned to leave, she followed. Not because she had to, but because, finally, someone wasn't asking her to forget. That night, Aidan opened the forest emergency file on his laptop, the one no one accessed without clearance. He typed in 2 words, Project Monarch Access, Restricted. He tried a backdoor through his old military account. A trace, pinged back, a fragment of a decommissioned medical facility. No location. Just a declassified phrase. Monarch is not a program. It's a mechanism. For obedience, for silence. And below that, status erased. His jaw clenched. They had tried to bury it, just like that bracelet, just like Quinn, just like Ivy. Outside, Cairo stood at the edge of the porch, unmoving, eyes fixed into the darkness beyond the tree line. Somewhere, miles off, a distant owl called, but there was no reply, only the stillness of something watching. The sun had not yet touched the tops of the pines when Aidan clicked the latch on the cabin door and stepped back into the station's dusty office. The air smelled like cedar, old paper, and something sharper like tension given shape. Ivy and Cairo were still asleep, or at least still silent. She curled against his side now, her fingers laced loosely into his thick black and tan fur like roots seeking ground. Aidan sat at the weathered desk and opened his laptop again. He didn't need coffee. Not anymore. What coursed through him was colder than caffeine, older than curiosity. It was resolve, the kind that woke with the dead and stayed until the truth was burned clean. He typed in the names again. Project Monarch. Quinn. Timberline County. This time, he went deeper into the digital ruins. Forums once buzzing with chatter, now filled with dead links. Whistleblower threads cut off mid-sentence. News articles pulled. Every time he clicked, he felt it, the fingerprint of something erased on purpose. Then finally, something held. A cached article from the Timberline Watch, dated 9 years ago. Local environmental scientist missing after filing suit against Timberline Industries. Name, Dr. Elise Quinn. Age, 31. Affiliation, Monarch Ecological Research Program. Disappearance, June 4th, 20XX. Last seen entering a private forest tract near Black Hollow Ridge. Quote from legal filing, redacted. Timberline Industries knowingly compromised federally protected land for covert chemical dumping, altering forest wildlife patterns and neural behavior in isolated test zones. Status, case dropped. No further investigation. Aidan leaned back in the chair. Quinn was real. Monarch was real. And both had been buried first figuratively, now literally. A photograph loaded with grainy resolution. A woman with a fierce gaze, thick-rimmed glasses, and wind-tangled hair. Not the type to vanish quietly. Aidan's mind reeled. This wasn't just a name on a bracelet. This was Ivy's Quinn, the protector she couldn't name, whose memory had been reduced to a handful of dirt and a silence too deep for a child. He exhaled slowly and clicked on the legal documents attached to the article. Most were redacted lines blacked out with the precision of fear. But one name remained in bold, untouchable font: Defendant, Timberline Industries. The rest was history rewritten in courtrooms and corporate checkbooks. Timberline had a record of lawsuits, and an uncanny record of winning. But not because they were innocent, because they were untouchable. Aidan scrolled further, chasing threads like veins on a leaf. The more he uncovered, the more the patterns emerged. Aerial maps of deforested zones, anomalous wildlife reports, entire valleys labeled reclamation zones yet fenced with military-grade surveillance. Old ranger reports marked internal only strange animal behavior, disappearances, unsubstantiated, archived. He paused. There it was again. Monarch buried inside a Department of Ecology budget summary as a closed field assessment study. The line item, Monarch Neural Impact Study, terminated, folded into Timberline Research Division. That was it. Quinn hadn't just filed a lawsuit. She'd uncovered something Timberline wanted silenced, something about the land, the chemicals, the behavioral shifts in both animals and maybe people. And now? Now a little girl, mute, bruised, and terrified of authority, had crawled out of that very forest, clutching to a dog like he was the last honest thing on earth. Aidan stared at the screen. The pieces didn't just suggest a cover-up, they screamed it. But there was still one piece missing. What had Ivy seen? What had she endured? Why was she still silent? And more pressing, if Timberline had tried to silence Quinn, what would they do if they knew Ivy was alive? His throat tightened. He closed the laptop and looked out the window. The forest stood still, watchful, as if it too remembered. There were no second chances in this kind of game. Only survivors, footsteps, barefoot, hesitant. Ivy appeared at the threshold in one of the ranger's oversized flannel shirts, sleeves nearly swallowing her arms. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were focused. She stepped into the office, stood beside Cairo, who'd silently followed her, and reached into her pocket. From it, she pulled a torn corner of a map. Aidan took it. It was an old forestry grid. A red X had been marked in shaky ink just east of Black Hollow Off Trail, outside ranger jurisdiction. He looked up. "You remember this place?" No reply. But she looked at him with eyes that didn't need words. It wasn't just a location. It was a graveyard. The storm had passed sometime in the night, leaving the forest hushed under a sheen of fog. Outside the cabin, mist curled between the trees like smoke from a memory that refused to die. Inside, the hearth glowed faintly, just enough to chase back the morning chill. Aidan sat across from Ivy at the worn wooden table, a cup of coffee forgotten in his hand. His eyes weren't on the steam curling upward. They were locked on the paper between them. Another of Ivy's drawings. She didn't speak. She never did. But her crayons had become her voice, and this one screamed. It wasn't the jagged flames, though they roared in crayon red and orange, devouring the outline of a car. It wasn't even the paw print, a perfect print smeared onto the window of the back seat, almost too deliberate, as if left behind by choice. It was the man, or rather the absence of him, just a silhouette, broad-shouldered, watching from the trees. No face, no detail, just a black void. Aidan's pulse kicked. He leaned forward, careful not to spook her. "Is this the night it happened?" he asked softly. Ivy didn't nod. She didn't blink, but she tightened her fingers around the green crayon in her hand until it snapped in two. Cairo shifted beside her on the floor, his ears twitching as if feeling the ripple of something ancient and awful moving through her. Aidan glanced at the other sketches strewn on the table. Most had been cryptic, fragmented images that felt more like puzzle pieces than full truths. But this was clearer, more detailed, a memory becoming sharper. A fire, a car, a paw print, a man in the woods. He reached into the folder beside him, pulling out the incident report from the Timberline County Archives. Dated 3 years ago. House fire. Single vehicle found outside the perimeter. Both parents deceased. Child presumed dead. No foul play confirmed. Electrical malfunction suspected. The official ruling had been accidental. But Ivy's drawing said otherwise. He flipped to the photo taken at the scene, blurry, distant. The SUV had been reduced to a metal shell, blackened like bone char. No sign of a dog in any of the official logs, no mention of a witness. And yet, Ivy had drawn a paw print on the inside of the glass, not outside, as if someone or something had been with her. Cairo. Was it possible? He looked at the dog now, stretched beside the fire, always near her. Too near. Not just companion-level attachment. This was survivor bond, trauma welded. Cairo was there, wasn't he? Aiden murmured. Ivy didn't look at him, but her lips parted, just barely. She pointed, not to the fire in the drawing, but to the man. Then she pressed the crayon against her own throat and drew a line. Not hard, not violent, but deliberate. A warning. Don't speak. Aiden felt something coil in his gut. He took a slow breath. That man. You've seen him again? Nothing. Only the flicker in her pupils, like the ember of a horror that never fully went out. Cairo sat up now, gaze alert, as if he too had sensed the shift. Aiden turned back to the drawing and traced the lines with his fingertip. This wasn't an accident. That fire, someone made it happen. He said it aloud. Ivy didn't flinch. He reached for his journal and jotted the connections. Quinn, missing after lawsuit, Timberline Industries, land cover-ups, Monarch Project, terminated, absorbed, Ivy presumed dead in car fire. Unknown male, observer, at scene, paw print, likely, Cairo's. His pen paused. This wasn't just a case of abuse anymore. This was something orchestrated, something deliberate. And if they'd gone so far as to stage a fire and fake a child's death, who else had disappeared? How many others? Aiden stood and crossed to the wall where the topographical map hung, peppered with pins and notes. He added a new red tack near the fire's location, drawing a thread between it and the Monarch test zone Quinn had last visited. Then another line to the stream where Ivy had unearthed the bracelet. The lines formed a triangle, a small one, too precise to be coincidence. He stared at it, the silence heavy behind him. Then a whisper broke it, not from Ivy's lips, but from the old radio on the far shelf. Static crackled, then a voice from dispatch. "Ranger Ward, come in. You've got a visitor at Gate Post 3, no ID, says he's from the Timberline Reclamation Committee. Claims it's urgent." Aiden's heart sank. He glanced at Ivy, who had frozen, eyes wide. Cairo growled low and guttural, not at the radio, but toward the window. The forest outside was still, but something had shifted. The past was waking up, and it was walking toward them. There are lines you don't cross unless you're willing to never come back. Aiden Ward knew that better than most. He'd spent years patrolling borders, some etched in dirt, others in silence. But this wasn't about land, This was about truth. And truth, once uncovered, had a habit of demanding sacrifice. The ranger station was dark except for the glow of the old desktop tucked beneath the loft stairs. Aiden sat hunched in the chair, headphones on, lips set in a line that hadn't relaxed since dispatch radioed the visitor's arrival hours ago. Whoever that man had been, he never left a name, just smiled too easily and said he'd return. Aiden didn't sleep after that. Instead, he made a call he'd sworn he never would, a contact from another life. The call was short. Code phrases and coordinates, no names. But it was enough. Now, Aiden's fingers hovered over an encrypted login interface, an old military access shell running off a buried satellite signal. Few still had the clearance. Even fewer had the guts to use it. He typed in the code, then the password. Access granted. The screen flickered. Operation Monarch, Sector 9, Archives, 14. Matches found. He exhaled. A series of PDF reports loaded, classified as defunct environmental monitoring cases, but tagged with Department of Defense identifiers. It was never just environmental. He knew that from the start. His eyes scanned the report headers. Subject: Quinn Delaney, Field Researcher, Affiliation, North Cascades Environmental Trust. DoD Contract B-117. Date: Terminated June 3, 20XX. Cause: Undetermined fire. Vehicle incident. Same date as Ivy's. He clicked. The report unfurled. Quinn and Mara Delaney, biologists assigned to investigate potential illegal toxic waste discharge into the groundwater beneath Timberline's eastern border. Suspected unlicensed activity by Timberline Industries and its subsidiaries. Multiple flagged anomalies. Evidence pending submission. They never made it. The fire report staged. Forensics edited post-submission. The child, presumed perished. There was a redacted section near the bottom. But Aiden knew how to read what wasn't there. A paragraph had been removed. Not blurred, but lifted entirely. Which meant it had names and threats. Aiden sat back in his chair, the weight of it pressing into his chest. Quinn and Mara weren't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were executed, because they were about to expose something that could destroy Timberline's expansion. And Ivy, small, silent Ivy, had survived what no child should have. She wasn't just a victim. She was the last witness. He looked toward the window where the curtains had been drawn tight. The snow outside glowed blue in the moonlight, quiet as a cemetery. From the floor above he heard the faint creak of movement. Ivy, probably shifting in her sleep. Cairo never left her side now. If she stirred, he stirred. Aiden's stomach knotted. This wasn't a ranger case anymore. It was a war crime buried beneath corporate timber contracts, phony restoration permits, and a dozen dead ends. He clicked on the map overlay. The toxic dump sites weren't random. They were buried near the same 3 geographic points Ivy had unknowingly drawn. The stream, the hollow under the tree, and the cabin with bars. Triangulated. Deliberate. The water was the key. They'd been testing something in the ground. He highlighted the coordinates, took screenshots, encrypted them under a burner drive he'd stash under the floorboards. And just as he finished, a soft voice broke the quiet. "Is that them?" Aiden spun. Ivy stood barefoot at the stair landing, wrapped in the oversized sweater he'd given her. Her eyes locked on the screen. She'd never spoken a full sentence before, but this time her voice didn't shake. Aiden swallowed. "Yeah," he said gently. "That's them." She padded down the last few steps and stopped beside the table. Her gaze flicked to the document, then back to him. "They tried to run," she whispered, "but the woods were watching." Aidan knelt, meeting her eyes. "What do you mean, Ivy? Who was watching?" She opened her palm. A crumpled sketch lay inside. Another man in the trees. Same silhouette. Same faceless shadow. But this time he had a badge. Not a police badge. Timberline's corporate logo, burned in charcoal at the top. Aidan's breath caught. She looked up. "He said they wouldn't find me if I stayed quiet." "And you didn't say a word," Aidan whispered. She nodded. Until now. Aidan tucked the sketch into the folder and rose to his feet. It was official. He'd crossed the line. And there was no going back. The storm arrived in pieces first, the wind skimming the treetops like something ancient had stirred. Then the sky cracked, not with anger, but with a warning. Inside the ranger cabin, the windows shivered in their panes. Rain tapped the roof in uneven rhythms like footsteps trying to remember their pace. Aidan moved quietly, lighting the old lantern by the stove as the power blinked again. The radio was static. Cell signal gone. Typical Timberline storm-fast, violent, isolating. Cairo lay curled beside the hearth, head resting on his paws, but eyes sharp. Ivy was tucked into the cot nearby, wrapped in a quilt too big for her silhouette rising and falling with shallow, restless breaths. She hadn't spoken since the night she'd pointed to the screen, since the man in the trees with no face. Aidan wasn't sure if her silence was protection or conditioning. He turned the kettle on, though he knew she wouldn't drink the tea. It was more for him, some kind of ritual to keep the room human. Then came the sound. A shift in breathing, a sudden intake sharp. Ivy sat up in the dark, shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on nothing. Cairo stirred immediately. He didn't bark. He bristled. Ears forward, body tense. Aidan froze mid-step, his mug halfway to the counter. He knew that posture. That wasn't alert. That was defense. The wind howled against the door. Then it came, soft as breath. Ivy leaned forward, pressed her mouth against the dog's ear. Her voice was almost inaudible. But Aidan heard it. One word, one syllable. Hide. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. Cairo froze, then let out a low, trembling whine. He moved closer to her, placing his body half in front like a barrier. Not growling, just shielding. Aidan felt it in his spine. The chill. Not from the storm, but from memory trying to surface. He set the mug down. "Hey, Ivy," he said carefully, kneeling beside the cot. "What did you say?" She didn't look at him, didn't blink. Her eyes were locked somewhere else, wide and dry and unseeing. "Cairo knows," she whispered finally. Her voice was so small, it was barely a breath. "He remembers, too." Aidan's jaw tightened. This wasn't random. She wasn't sleep-talking. "Is that what someone told you?" he asked gently. "Before the fire? Before you ran?" Ivy's hands trembled in her lap. "No," she said slowly. "I told him." She reached under the quilt and pulled out a small object, a plastic snap tag from a collar, cracked, soot-stained, half-melted. The name on it, barely visible in the lightning flash. Scout. "Cairo's not his real name," she murmured. Aidan took it with shaking fingers. The melted edges told a story no report ever had. Project Monarch hadn't just dumped waste. They'd used dogs, trained them, named them, tagged them, and when things went south, burned the evidence. But somehow, this one got out, and he took her with him. The rain battered harder against the walls. Aiden felt it like a clock starting to tick louder. "Who told you to hide, Ivy?" he asked again. This time, her eyes moved slowly, deliberately toward the window, and she didn't speak. But her expression said enough. They weren't alone. Cairo moved before the sound even registered ears, sharp, body low, moving like liquid shadow to the door. Aiden followed with instinct, not thought. Outside, the storm had weakened to a misting hush, the kind that made every pine needle drip like a ticking clock. But the dog was locked on something beyond the tree line, still as stone, staring into the dusk. A hum, high-pitched, faint, too perfect to be nature. Then Aiden saw it, a glint overhead, no bigger than a hawk, but wrong in every way. No wing beat, no drift. It hovered, a drone. His pulse surged. He grabbed the flashlight, switched it off, then reached for the hunting rifle tucked by the stove. Old habits, military muscle memory, center mass, crack, one shot. The thing spun wildly, spiraling like a wounded insect, then clipped a branch and fell into the mud near the outhouse. Sparks hissed against wet pine needles. Cairo didn't move from his post. Neither did Ivy. She'd come to stand behind him, silent, barefoot, clutching the hem of her borrowed sweater. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "Aiden," she said softly, and it stopped him cold. She hadn't called him that before, not out loud, not ever. He turned. She held out a drawing, just crayon lines, frantic and layered but repeated with exactness that made his stomach turn. A black van, over and over and over, each one the same. Tinted windows, no license plate, a dent near the right tail light. Aiden crouched down beside her. "You've seen it before." She nodded. "Recently?" She didn't answer. Instead, she flipped the page. This one was different. The van again, but in the woods this time. Parked, hidden. And beside it, a man tall, wrong in shape, face blank like she'd erased it, or like it had never been there to begin with. She pointed to the tree line beyond the drone wreckage. The pines. Aiden rose slowly. Every hair on his arm stood up. "Pack a bag," he said under his breath, not to her but to himself. "Tonight." Cairo turned to look at him as if already ahead of the thought. "But Ivy..." Ivy clutched her drawing tighter. "They always come in pairs," she whispered. "What?" "Drones," she said. "One sees, the other listens." Lightning cracked somewhere far behind the hills. Aiden's stomach dropped. He turned off every light. Then, without sound, he placed a hand on Cairo's head and nodded toward the broken drone. "Find the second." He watched from the porch as Cairo disappeared into the dark, silent as fog. The dog melted into the woods like he'd been born from it. Ivy stood beside Aiden now, wrapped in a blanket, eyes still scanning the trees like they whispered things she couldn't block out. "You've seen that man before," Aiden said gently. She gave the smallest nod. "Is he the one who told you to hide?" She shook her head. "He's the one I didn't." Aiden swallowed hard. Inside, his laptop blinked with the report he'd been building. The files on Monarch. Timberline's cover-ups. And now, it was no longer just theory. They were being watched, tracked, hunted. He knelt beside her and touched her shoulder lightly. We won't stay here." Ivy didn't look scared. She looked ready. And that frightened Aidan more than anything. The sound came not as a bang, but a ripple, like the world exhaled wrong. Then everything happened at once. The floor lifted beneath Aidan's boots. A pulse of pressure cracked through the cabin walls, and a second later fire. It roared like it had been waiting. Glass shattered. Wood screamed. He didn't think, just moved. "Cairo!" he shouted, already grabbing Ivy, already pulling her tight against his chest as embers spit through the air like angry bees. The front of the ranger station was gone. Not burning gone. Reduced to a churning storm of flame, heat, and shredded timber, the entire entryway had collapsed inward like the maw of some hungry thing. Cairo bolted in from the kitchen seconds later, flank already scorched, eyes wide and wild, but not with panic, with direction. He darted for the back door, then turned, a snarl caught between warning and command. "Move." Aidan didn't wait. Ivy was frozen in his arms, her body shaking, her breath sharp with shock. "Hold on, little doe," he murmured, using the name from the first night, the one that had meant protection before she had a real one. He kicked the back door open. Flames were already curling up the exterior siding. Smoke poured into the trees. The world had turned orange. And then, black. They ran. The back trail was one Cairo knew better than any ranger. It twisted behind the cabin's utility shed, down a gully, and past the old deer blinds no one used anymore. Aidan had marked it years ago with red nylon thread, emergency use only. Now it was their lifeline. The heat chased them like a living thing. Aidan felt it clawing at his back, trying to take them with it. Ivy clung to him with arms locked so tightly around his neck he could hardly breathe. But she didn't cry. Not at first. Not until they broke through the second ridge and the burning cabin fell from view, swallowed by pine smoke and distance. Then he heard it. The sound that broke something inside him. A sob, not just of fear, but fracture. She slid from his arms, knees hitting wet moss, and covered her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Aidan knelt beside her, chest heaving. "You're safe now," he said. "No," she breathed. "No, I'm not." She looked up at him with eyes that belonged to someone older, someone who'd seen fire before. "They found me." Cairo stood nearby, watching the trail behind them, his entire body tense. Not barking, not growling, just listening, and Aidan understood why. The fire wasn't the threat. It was the signal. They're close. He pulled off his pack, handed Ivy a canteen, and brushed the hair from her damp forehead. "This isn't your fault," he said quietly. "Yes, it is." Her voice cracked. "They only came because of me." Aidan shook his head. "They came because of what you know. That's not guilt, Ivy. That's power." She looked at him, searching for the lie. But there wasn't one. Smoke drifted low through the trees now, thick but slowing. The wind had shifted west. "We can't stay here," Aidan said, rising. "We head for the ridge line. There's a fire tower with solar. If we're lucky, the old radio still works." "And if we're not?" Ivy asked. Aidan checked the pistol on his hip, checked the backup knife in his boot. "Then we stop being lucky," he said, "and start being ready." Cairo nudged Ivy's hand, his nose warm and wet against her palm. She didn't flinch this time. She reached out and held him, like a promise. They disappeared into the woods together, man, girl, and dog smoke curling behind them like the ghost of a home they'd just lost. And somewhere, far behind, a second fire lit the edge of the pines. Not an accident, not a warning, a beginning. They hiked for nearly 3 hours up through the misted ridgeline where the trees grew thin and the air took on a cold that bit deeper than mere weather. Every step was silence, not because they were hiding, but because Ivy hadn't spoken since the fire, not even to Cairo. The girl who'd whispered hide during a storm now walked like a ghost through the forest, one hand clutching the straps of Aiden's borrowed pack, the other never straying far from Cairo's fur. The dog moved like a shadow beside her, ears high, steps light, eyes always scanning. Aiden led them up the slope, breath shallow in the thinning air, until they reached it, half swallowed by pine and thyme. An old ranger fire station, long since decommissioned, camouflaged by moss and rock. No power, no signal, but no footprints either. They were alone, and for now, that was the safest place on earth. Inside, the dust was thick but dry, one window still intact, the radio long dead, a cot tucked in the far corner like a forgotten apology. Aiden stripped off his jacket and laid it across a bench. He checked the floorboards, cleared the chimney, and rationed what little food they had left into 2 protein bars and half a thermos of water. Then he glanced at Ivy. She was already crouched by the wall, a stub of charcoal from the wood stove in her hand. And she was drawing. No words, just strokes. First, the outline of a mountain range. Then a tall building, angular and glassy out of place in the wilderness she'd just etched. Then a symbol, 2 curved pine trees in a mirrored arc encircling a crown. Aiden's throat tightened. He knew that logo. He'd seen it printed on the side of helicopters that weren't supposed to fly this far north, on folders that vanished from evidence lockers, on envelopes filled with money meant to silence good men. Timberline Industries. She finished the drawing, then stared at it, her fingers trembling. Not fear, not memory. Recognition. Like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Aiden crouched beside her. "You've seen that before," he said softly. She nodded once. Cairo sat between them like a sentry. "Where?" Ivy didn't answer. She turned the charcoal around in her fingers, eyes distant. Then she spoke not with voice, but motion. She tapped the side of the logo, then drew a line through it, broken, then a smaller shape, a circle, a cage, a shadow inside. And just below that, the face of a dog, wide ears, sharp eyes, a slash across the left flank. Cairo. Aiden felt something cold uncoil inside him. She wasn't just remembering logos. She was remembering locations, people, maybe labs. He looked at her again, really looked. Her hands were dirty, her shoes still half melted from the fire. Her arms were covered in old bruises that hadn't bloomed fully to the surface yet. But her eyes, they held maps. This wasn't just a child fleeing a fire. This was a child who had seen something buried, and someone out there was willing to burn down everything just to keep her from remembering it. "Ivy," he said quietly, "what you're remembering. Does it hurt?" She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She picked up the charcoal again and drew a rectangle, this time not a building, but a screen. Then static lines, and behind them, 2 smaller figures, a man, a woman, holding hands, her parents, watching her through glass, testing. Aiden swallowed hard. Then she turned to a fresh space on the wall and wrote something. Just 3 letters, M-O-N. And then she stopped. Tears welled at the corner of her eyes, but didn't fall. Cairo rested his head on her shoulder. She leaned into him and finally closed her eyes. Aidan stepped outside. The wind was sharp on the ridge, brushing past pine needles with a sound like whispers in another tongue. He scanned the horizon. Nothing but silence. But he knew better. Silence wasn't absence. It was prelude. Back inside, he covered Ivy with an old wool blanket and watched her sleep for the first time since the fire. Even now her fingers twitched, as if dreaming in charcoal. He looked at the wall again, at the broken timberline symbol, the cage, the dog, the 3 letters, Mon. He remembered what the old military contact had said just once, in passing. Monarch. A code name, a program, one designed to alter behavioral patterns in children using environmental pressure, isolation, trauma. A theory no one was supposed to prove. But someone had, and her name was Ivy. The snow that fell overnight was soft, too soft. It muted sound, erased tracks, and whispered safety. But Aidan didn't trust it. Not this high, not this quiet. He rose before dawn, boots crunching faintly on the frozen crust as he scanned the slope beneath the ranger station. Cairo followed, nose low, ears twitching. There was something unnatural about the stillness. It wasn't just the cold. It was a pause, a held breath. That's when Cairo stopped. One paw hovered above the snow, no bark, no growl. He just stared, then stepped back. Aidan crouched. Something metallic glinted in the powder. He reached down, brushing the snow with gloved fingers. A sensor, small, flat, camouflaged in white casing, wired to a long-life transmitter, buried just beneath the path they'd taken yesterday. Motion triggered. Someone had found them, and they weren't here yet, but they were coming. By the time the sun broke through the tree line, Aidan had pulled 3 more from the ridge, each more hidden than the last, each left behind like a hunter's whisper. "We see you." Inside the station, Ivy sat cross-legged on the floor, rubbing Cairo's ears in slow circles. The dog had become her anchor, her translator, her protector. But even now, he watched the door. Aidan shut it behind him. Ivy looked up. He held the sensor in his palm, wordless. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for a crayon, drew a circle with 3 lines. Radiating signal. Aidan nodded. "You've seen them before." She tapped the drawing, then drew an eye above it. "They're watching." He felt something coil tight in his chest. They weren't just tracking. They were studying, anticipating. Whoever had placed those sensors knew the woods, but so did he. They spent the rest of the morning resetting the terrain. Aidan walked her through every step, hands steady, voice low. How to scatter pine needles to mask a scent trail. How to step heel to toe to avoid breaking twigs. How to listen, not just with ears but with skin. "You move through trees," he whispered, "not against them." Ivy watched everything, mimicked each motion with silent precision. When she couldn't follow, Cairo would nudge her gently, a paw tap, a tail flick, like the two were built from the same blueprint. By noon, she could move 10 feet without sound. By afternoon, she was invisible. Then came the signals. Aidan drew them into the dirt outside the cabin basic military grade. Fist closed, freeze, palm open, come. 2 fingers to the lips. Silence. He showed her once, twice, then stepped back and tested. Ivy got them all. No hesitation. And then, without warning, she added one of her own. She touched 2 fingers to her temple, then tapped the ground once. He frowned. "What does that mean?" She did it again, slower, then pointed to a nearby pine cone and mimed stepping over it. Aiden blinked. Trap. She had her own language, her own survival system. Whatever place had built her Project Monarch, Timberline, the cage, they hadn't broken her. They had only made her adaptive. Night fell fast on the ridge. By the time the first stars blinked into being, Aiden had rigged the perimeter with his own surprises. He wasn't trying to kill anyone. He just needed time. Tin tripwires that rang like forest bells, false paths seeded with broken glass under snow, a flare line improvised from a magnesium stick and bear spray that would paint the trees like lightning if triggered. This was no longer just hiding. It was warcraft. And Ivy Small, silent and unshakable, was now his student, his responsibility. Later, in the firelight, she drew again. This time, it was a grid, 6 squares, each holding a shape door, bed, cage, screen, eye, fire. She pointed to the third square, then touched her own arm right where the skin bore faint white scars. Aiden didn't speak. He just pulled out his knife, slid it across the table between them. Not a threat, a promise. "If they come," he said quietly, "they won't leave with you." Cairo lifted his head and let out a low, guttural growl. Outside, nothing moved. But the wind had changed. It no longer smelled like snow. It smelled like people. It started with a twitch of Cairo's ears. Not a bark, not a growl. Just a low vibration in his chest, a stiffness in his frame, as if every nerve beneath his fur had turned to wire. Aiden felt it too. The kind of stillness that comes before the snap of a branch. The kind that sets old instincts roaring back to life. 1:43 a.m. The ranger station sat in breathless dark, the fire now embers. Ivy was curled under her blanket, Cairo pressed to her side, his nose tucked to her knee. But now he stood, muscles taut. He turned his head toward the window and froze, then gave one sharp breath through his nose. Aiden was on his feet in seconds, heart pounding in rhythm with a memory that hadn't surfaced since war. We are not alone. He moved to the corner of the cabin, avoiding the creaky floorboards, hand already brushing the rifle propped against the wall. No flashlight, no noise, just breath. Outside, the moon was thin, but enough to catch the faintest shimmer of movement. 2 figures, low to the ground, armed, trained, fast. Not hikers, not cops. Hunters. One broke off toward the blind spot of the cabin's west side. The other kept to the trees, moving in a curve, trying to flank. Aiden mouthed a silent curse they'd been tracking for days. Tonight, they moved in. Cairo was already at the door, silent, eyes burning like coals. Aiden lowered to one knee beside him and whispered, "Guard Ivy. If anything moves through that door, you take it down." Cairo didn't need commands. He knew. He bumped his head once against Ivy's chest, who stirred but did not wake, then slunk into the shadows beside the cot like a phantom. Aiden slipped out the back. The air cut his face like glass, but he barely noticed. Every sound now had shape. Every gust of wind could be a breath. He saw the first man near the eastern slope, crouched, scanning the sensor's remains. He was lean, gear black, face masked in cloth, military boots, custom stock rifle, and something on his wrist, an earpiece receiver, just like Aiden used to wear. But this man wasn't here to gather intel. He was here to silence something. Someone. Aiden moved low, found cover beneath a fallen pine trunk, and waited until the man's knee rose in line with the starlight. One shot. Not a kill, he didn't need blood, just time. He squeezed the trigger. The crack echoed through the ridge. The man dropped with a grunt, not dead, but down. Aiden sprinted from cover, only to see the second figure turn toward the noise, raise a weapon, and fire. The shot tore through the dark. Aiden ducked behind a rock, rolled, and returned fire, just enough to scatter the aim. Then the second man vanished into the trees like smoke. Gone. But not for long. Back inside, Ivy sat up, eyes wide, pupils blown. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't crying. She was listening. Cairo stood in front of her, fur bristled. Then, a sound. Glass shattered. The front window. The injured man, dragging himself, had tried to breach. And Cairo moved like lightning. The door hadn't even finished opening when Cairo hit him. Fangs sank into the man's arm, dragging him down with the fury of a storm. Aiden burst through seconds later, weapon raised but stopped. The man was on the ground, writhing, but Cairo was limping. Aiden rushed forward. Cairo backed away, still guarding Ivy, but blood soaked one leg, a deep gash across the thigh, shrapnel, or a blade. The man groaned. Aiden kicked his weapon away, knelt to check his pulse alive but barely conscious. No badge, no ID. Just like before. He dragged the body outside and tied the man's wrists tight with paracord, anchoring him to the pine post. There'd be questions later. But first, Cairo. Inside, Ivy was kneeling beside the dog, hands shaking. But she wasn't crying. She was humming, low, soft. The same broken melody she'd hummed in her sleep, a lullaby with no words, just breath and trembling hope. Cairo's eyes didn't leave hers, even through the pain. Aiden knelt beside them, ripped open a med kit. "I need to clean it," he said. "He'll live, but it's deep." Ivy reached out, rested her hand on Cairo's fur, and for the first time she looked Aiden in the eyes and nodded. She trusted him, not because he promised safety, but because Cairo still breathed. An hour later, the fire was lit again. The bleeding had stopped. The cabin stank of sweat, gunpowder, antiseptic, and something older. Fear. Outside, the man still moaned. Somewhere in the distance, a drone buzzed once and vanished. They knew. They knew this had failed. They'd be back. Better armed, more prepared. Aiden sat against the door with his rifle across his knees. Ivy curled beside Cairo, one hand wrapped around his paw like a tether. And the only sound left in the cabin was the breath of 3 hearts still beating, together. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky bleached pale with morning. Mist clung to the treetops like breath unwilling to let go. The ranger station creaked with old wood and older memories. Inside, Ivy sat cross-legged on the floor near the stone hearth, wrapped in a blanket too big for her frame. Cairo slept beside her, his leg bandaged, chest rising and falling, slow, steady. Every now and then his ears twitched, still guarding even in rest. Aiden moved quietly through the storage room, sorting through the last of the salvaged gear. The attack had pushed them deeper into isolation. They couldn't run forever. But today, just for today, he let the silence hold. Then he found it. A small tin box, rusted around the edges, half buried behind a pile of water-damaged maps. Inside, old receipts, a broken compass, and beneath it all, a faded photograph sealed in plastic. He turned it over and froze. There, In the snapshot's soft grain were two smiling faces, bright-eyed, windswept, arms wrapped around a little girl with messy hair and ink on her hands. Ivy. She was laughing, caught mid-spin. The woman, her mother, wore a red scarf. The man, her father, had that unmistakable steadiness in his gaze, the kind Ivy now wore in silence. Aidan blinked hard. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the photo over, scrawled on the back in thick, looping handwriting. To Ivy Quinn, our brightest light. Love always, Mom and Dad. Quinn. The name hit him like the sharp smell of pine after fire. He stared at it for a long time, then walked back into the main room. Ivy looked up when she heard his boots. No words, just curiosity and the faint flicker of something else. Recognition. He knelt beside her and held out the photo. Her fingers hovered above it. Then, slowly, deliberately, she took it. For a moment, nothing. Then, her breath caught. Her eyes widened. She traced the image with a shaking finger, pausing on her father's smile. Then her mother's scarf. Then her own face. That little girl, frozen in time. A laugh not heard in years, a life not yet broken. Her lips parted, and a sound came out raw and trembling. Not a cry, a word, a name. Ivy. Aidan didn't move. She clutched the photo like it would vanish if she let go. Quinn, she added, barely a whisper. But it was there. Her voice, her name, her truth. And then the tears came, not loud, not wild, just soft sobs that crumpled her shoulders inward, like something cracked and was finally allowed to spill. She wasn't crying for the picture. She was crying for everything it reminded her she lost. Aidan sat beside her and didn't say a word, didn't try to fix it, didn't reach for the pieces, just stayed, because some things shouldn't be spoken over. And in that moment, the air felt sacred. Cairo stirred, sensing the change. He stood wobbly but insistent, and pressed his head against Ivy's knee. She buried her face in his fur, still clutching the photo. Aidan looked at the fire. It had burned low again, but not out. Later, as the snow started to fall lightly outside, Ivy placed the photo inside a metal box Aidan had reinforced for weatherproofing. She closed the lid and held it to her chest. She looked at Aidan, really looked, and mouthed two words this time. Thank you. No voice. But she didn't need one. Her name had returned, and with it, something deeper, the will to remember. Wind howled through the upper ridge, rattling the rafters of the old ranger station. It was the kind of wind that made you check the door twice and speak in whispers without knowing why. Aidan sat at the table, surrounded by a patchwork of salvaged tech batteries strung together with copper wire, a cracked military-grade tablet, the guts of a satellite modem, and a burner phone that had somehow survived the cabin fire. He worked by lantern light. No signals, no networks. Everything was off-grid by design. But that didn't mean it had to stay that way. Not tonight. Ivy slept in the corner, curled against Cairo's side, clutching the tin box with the photograph inside. Her breathing had finally steadied. The name had grounded her. But names had trails, and trails led to truths. Truths that killed people. Aidan inserted the microdrive he'd recovered from an encrypted vault Ivy's parents had once hidden beneath the floorboards of their study back when he still wore a badge, and the word cover-up was just a theory. The file blinked on screen. Project Monarch. Eyes only. Lines of code guarded the entry. It wasn't just password protected. It was buried under layers of military-grade encryption. But Aiden wasn't guessing. He remembered Ivy's father, a quiet man, engineer by training, environmental investigator by mission, and a creature of habit. The password? He tried. Quinn, 0314. The screen flickered and opened. What spilled out wasn't just documents. It was proof. Thousands of pages, testimonies, water quality reports, internal memos, all pointing to the same source. Timberline Industries. The name pulsed like a wound. Aiden clicked open a folder labeled Stillwater Incident. Video files loaded, some corrupted, some intact. One began to play. Blurry body cam footage. Ivy's mother, Grace, speaking in a low, urgent voice. The groundwater samples are consistent. Benzene levels off the charts. They've been burning toxic waste and burying it near the aquifer. This whole region. Stillwater? It's already poisoned. The camera shook as something exploded in the distance. Another file, an email flagged as urgent. From Grace to a whistleblower lawyer in Seattle. If anything happens to us, Ivy knows. She saw the trucks. The creek behind our house is the runoff line. Quinn's bracelet is in the mailbox. She scratched her name on it. That's your time stamp. That's when it all began. Aiden exhaled slowly. This wasn't just corporate negligence. It was environmental homicide. And they'd tried to silence the only people brave enough to expose it. He flipped to a photo attachment. Aerial view. Black smoke billowing from a facility just south of the Timberline complex. Labeled Controlled Burn Site 17. Except it wasn't controlled. The next file was a local news broadcast never aired. Footage cut mid-report. Several children in Stillwater are experiencing unexplained neurological symptoms. Screen static. Cut. Deleted. Buried. But not gone. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples. The timeline was beginning to take shape. Ivy's parents weren't paranoid. They were hunted. Because they knew. Because they kept receipts. And now, Ivy was the last thread Timberline hadn't severed. Footsteps. Soft ones. He looked up. Ivy stood at the doorway to the main room, wrapped in her blanket, eyes glossy but alert. Her fingers clenched the edge of the fabric like it anchored her. She didn't speak, but something in her posture asked, a question he couldn't dodge anymore. Aiden turned the screen toward her. Not the worst of it, but just enough. The footage of her parents. Smiling, then overlaid with reports, satellite photos, charts, water tables, and a final file labeled simply, Quinn. He didn't open that one. She reached out and tapped the name. Aiden hesitated, then clicked. Inside? Handwritten notes scanned into PDFs, her parents' handwriting. A map of Timberline marked with graves each tied to past outbreaks. At the bottom, Grace's final message, scrawled in blue ink. The truth always leaves a footprint, even in fire. Ivy stared, unblinking, then pointed to a spot, Echo Ridge, a place erased from maps but still breathing beneath the trees. "We go there," she said. Aiden nodded. No questions, just action. Outside, the storm built again, but this time they walked into it. No markers guided them, just snow-swallowed trails and heavy silence. Ivy moved as if guided by memory, not sight. Cairo stayed close. Aiden followed. After an hour, Ivy raised her hand sharp, precise. They'd arrived. The shack was nearly hidden rotting wood, vines crawling up its bones. One corner collapsed. Time hadn't erased what had happened here. Inside, the air was colder. Still. Cairo whined low. Blood stained the floor, some smeared, some dragged. Chains hung from the wall. Aiden's stomach turned. Ivy didn't flinch. She walked past the sink, the cot, and picked up a small, torn pink sneaker. She sat, quietly trembling. "Here," she whispered. "They brought me here after the fire." She remembered a girl named Sarah who shared a granola bar before she disappeared. Aiden found tally marks scratched into the wall. Hidden wires led to a panel beneath the floor. Inside, 3 memory drives. A case marked "Property of T-Line Seacops." Outside, Aiden ran one of the drives on his tablet. Footage. Ivy, younger, chained to the cot. A masked man injected her arm. Screen cut to black. Another child. More footage. Voices. "Make her disappear. Burn the files. Timberline wants silence." He shut it off. Back inside, Ivy traced the tally marks. "I stopped counting after Sarah. Thought forgetting would let me start over." "You don't have to forget," Aiden said. "Just survive long enough to make them pay." Her gaze met his, cold, burning. "They made one mistake." "What's that?" "They left me alive." Cairo barked, sudden and sharp. A sound in the woods. They weren't alone anymore. The old ranger station at Bearjaw Bluff still smelled of pine and diesel. Aiden walked past rusted lockers, heading for the cracked vinyl chair at the end of the hallway where Park Director Nolan Everett waited. Same shirt, same face. But the eyes greasier now, hollow. Aiden didn't sit, just stared. "You still look like the trees tell you secrets," Everett said. Aiden reached into his jacket, tapped a blinking pen. "You know why I'm here?" Everett feigned innocence. "Cabin incident? Tragic. No one knew I was there but you. You signed the clearance and the deal with Timberline 10 years ago." Everett's smile faded. "You used to follow orders." "I wasn't supposed to find a girl locked in a death shack either." Everett's voice dropped. "Careful, son. I'm not your son." "No," he muttered. "You're worse. Righteous." Aiden laid out photos, ledgers, maps, all proof from Ivy's escape dump sites, contracts, satellite images. "You handed over federal land for chemical dumping. People died. Ivy's parents were silenced." "You can't prove that." "I don't have to." He tapped the pen. Everett froze, then slid a fat envelope across the table. Cash. 50 grand. Take the girl. Disappear. "You think this is about money?" "You have no idea who you're poking. They know her name. Not yours." Aiden stood. "You covered up a genocide." Everett reached for his drawer. Aiden's hand dropped near his holster. "Don't." Everett slumped. "You won't win," he whispered. "You'll get her killed." Aiden paused at the door. "I'd rather die protecting someone innocent than rot like you." Outside, Cairo waited by the truck. Inside the cab, Ivy sat awake. Her eyes met his. She knew. "He tried to buy me off," Aiden said. "He's scared," Ivy whispered. "Good," Aiden replied. Then, "So am I." A pause. "We all are," he added. Then glanced at the blinking recorder. "One down. We take the rest." They drove toward Reckoning. Snow fell gently outside the ranger cabin. Inside, Ivy sat sketching shapes, fragments, a logo she somehow knew. Cairo rested beside her, always alert. Aidan stood at the window, waiting. Then 3 knocks, calm, precise. He opened the door halfway. A man stood there, clean cut, clipboard, badge, Child Protective Services. "Mr. Shaw, we received a tip missing child in your care." Ivy saw him and snapped. Her scream wasn't fear. It was recognition. Cairo lunged. The agent flinched, reaching for something. Wrong move. Cairo slammed him into the snow. His badge flew. A matte black pistol flashed from beneath his coat. Not CPS issue. Aidan fired once. A warning. Snow exploded beside the man's hand. "Stay down," Aidan growled. Cairo pinned him. Aidan grabbed the fake badge. Cheap print. Inside the coat and earpiece. Label, T-Line Ops. "Ivy, pack your bag. Now." She didn't move at first, frozen in place. But when Cairo nudged her, she moved. She always did, when he did. They left fast. Aidan bound the man's hands, destroyed the earpiece, burned the ID, then vanished into the trees. Ivy whispered on the run, "I know him. He stopped me when I tried to escape the compound." Her voice was ice and fire. "You're not going back," Aidan said. "Not ever." By dusk, they were camped deep in the woods. Ivy sat silent by the fire, then reached into her coat, pulled out a torn page, Monarch Protocol. One line circled. Tier 3. Retrieval. Authorization. Child units deemed high risk. Must be reacquired or neutralized. "They weren't protecting me," she said. "They wanted to erase me." Aidan looked to Cairo. Ivy continued, voice raw. "He knew." Cairo remembered before I did. She reached for him, and Cairo leaned into her touch like he'd been waiting for that memory to return. They didn't sleep much, not from cold, but from knowing. They weren't just being followed, they were being hunted. And Ivy? She wasn't just a missing child, she was evidence. And evidence gets buried unless someone fights to keep it alive. Inside a ranger outpost, Aidan worked on a battered laptop, powered by car battery. Ivy sat nearby, Cairo close. Encrypted files flickered open. Project Pinnacle. Subject 6B. Ivy Quinn. He clicked one. Night vision footage. Ivy chained. A voice. "No outbursts since sedation." Her small voice. "I want to go home." A reply. "Home doesn't exist. Your property now." Cairo growled low. Aidan closed the laptop. No more waiting. He rigged a signal. Military grade. Typed 3 words. Monarch files inbound. The recipient. Isla Reyes, Invictus Journal. One of the few who printed truth. He attached everything. Documents, footage, logs. Then sent it. Delivered. He exhaled. It was done. 24 hours later, the world ignited. Whispers turned into headlines. The Monarch Files. Corporate giant disappears children to hide environmental crimes. Ivy's face remained hidden, but her story spread like wildfire. Her parents' photo aired beside an old note. "To Ivy Quinn, our brightest light." The anchor's voice was firm. "This is not just a scandal. This is a war crime on domestic soil." Ivy didn't cry. The world was doing it for her now. That night, Aidan knew. They'd come again. But not with fake badges, with satellites, firepower, deniability. He checked his rifle. Cairo stayed close. Ivy sat by the fire, watching the sky. "You think anyone else made it out?" she asked. "I don't know. If they did, maybe they'll see this. Maybe they'll stop hiding." "Maybe," Aiden said. "Or maybe they'll run. I wouldn't." The fire cracked. A slow wind stirred the pines. By morning, the road into Timberline was blockaded. Drones circled. Protesters marched. The company denied everything. But it was too late. The truth had teeth. And it would not go quietly. It started with a press conference, polished podium, flag backdrop. Timberline's interim CEO stood flanked by silent men in black suits. "This man is dangerous," she declared. "Aiden Shaw is no whistleblower. He's a rogue operator with ties to extremist networks. He's compromised national security, and he's harboring a minor whose safety is at risk." Cameras flashed. High in the alpine ridge, Aiden watched the feed on a cracked tablet. Behind him, Ivy spoke quietly. "They're hunting you now." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. 2 hours later, helicopters buzzed overhead. Unmarked, silent. Below them, boots in snow, hired men in matching gear. They weren't here to arrest. They were here to erase. Aiden led Ivy and Cairo deeper into the ridgeline where the path vanished and the air thinned. Wind howled like it remembered what was coming. Then an old forest observation tower emerged, weather-beaten and skeletal. No ranger had set foot there in over a decade. It would do. Aiden barricaded the base, reinforced windows, laid traps. Ivy worked beside him. No questions asked. Cairo, ever watchful, limped the perimeter. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a last stand. That night, as snow began to fall, Aiden marked red X's on a topographical map possible entry points. Traps, detonators, lines that would scream without sound. "You've done this before," Ivy said. "There was a time I thought this kind of prep was paranoia. And now? Now I think I wasn't paranoid enough." By 2:47 a.m. the radio cracked once. No voice, just a click. "They're checking range," Aiden muttered. He handed Ivy a knife. "If they breach, take Cairo. Go up. Hide. Don't make me worry." "Do you think we'll survive this?" He looked out at the sleeping forest. "We've already survived more than they expected." Dawn. Snow fell thick and quiet. The first shot tore the silence. Aiden was already crouched by the window. Outside footsteps. Dozens. They were here. He opened the trap door. Ivy and Cairo crouched inside. "You stay down, no matter what." Ivy tried to speak, but Cairo nudged her gently, telling her, "Trust him." "We'll come back," Aiden said. Then he shut the door. Outside, flashbangs lit the trees. Shadows moved between trunks. One man slipped in from the ridge. Aiden's rifle barked. Another hit a tripwire. Fire bloomed. The tower shook. Ivy clutched Cairo, curled in the cellar, whispering his name like a prayer. They came in waves. Aiden didn't just fight. He remembered. Every shot, a lesson from wars past. Cairo fought beside him, driving attackers away like a herding wolf. Then, a shape, low and fast. A grenade flew. Aiden shouted, but Cairo was already gone. The cellar door burst open. Ivy looked up too late. A man hurled a grenade down. Cairo lunged. The blast wasn't full strength. Aiden had stripped their explosives, but it was enough to collapse wood and snow. Smoke. Silence. Then Cairo's body sprawled over Ivy, bleeding, barely breathing. Aiden dragged them behind cover. Gauze. Blood. Pressure. "He'll make it," Aiden said. "Keep pressure." Ivy nodded, tears falling. This was his war now, and she understood. Above, smoke curled through pine. Aiden moved like vengeance. He didn't aim to wound. Every shot was final. By nightfall, silence returned. 6 men lay in the snow. Aiden stood barely. He limped back to the cellar. Cairo stirred just enough to open one eye. "He stayed," Ivy whispered. Aiden knelt beside them, hand on Cairo's fur. "No," he said. "We all did." Ash floated through the broken tower. Aiden sat against the wall, dried blood on his temple. Eyes open, but far away. Ivy knelt over Cairo's body. He hadn't moved in an hour. His fur was cold. The bleeding had stopped, not because he was healing, but because there was no more fight left. She pressed a palm to his chest. Nothing. Her own chest collapsed inward. This tower, once a home, then a war zone, was now a tomb. She touched the scar on Cairo's ribs, the one from shielding her. She remembered it all now, not in flashes, fully. He hadn't hesitated. He chose her, even when no one else had. Her lips moved. No sound. Then, like something cracking loose, "Please!" It came broken, but real. Then again, louder. "Please don't go." Her voice was back, not for herself, for him. Silence answered. Then a breath, so faint it might have been wind. But it wasn't. Cairo's chest rose. Ivy gasped. This time it made sound. Tears fell on his fur. Her forehead pressed to his. "You stayed," she whispered. He groaned, weak but alive. Behind her, Aiden stood bloody, shaking. But when he heard her speak, really speak, he froze. He didn't interrupt. Her words were sacred. "I said something," Ivy whispered, tears streaking soot. Aiden nodded. "You said everything." And in that broken place, surrounded by ash, with snow stained red, something beautiful began. Not hope. Hope is fragile. This was stronger. A beginning. The operating room lights cast everything in sterile blues and whites. But Ivy didn't see them. Her eyes were locked on the stainless steel doors. Hours had passed, maybe days. Time felt like it had folded in on itself. She sat unmoving on a plastic chair, the IV band still taped to her wrist from the sedative they'd finally convinced her to take. Her sweater smelled like smoke and antiseptic. She still hadn't changed out of the bloodied clothes from Frostpine. Aiden stood nearby, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, unreadable. But every few minutes he glanced at her, checking if she was still breathing, still holding on. Then the surgeon appeared, mask pulled down, gloves off. "I won't lie," she began. "We nearly lost him twice. His lung collapsed, fragments near the spine, but he made it through." The air left Ivy's lungs like she'd been holding it for years. Cairo had lived. 2 days later, she was finally allowed in the recovery room. The machines beeped softly. Tubes and gauze masked most of him, but his eyes opened when he sensed her step inside. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just looked at her, and that was enough. Ivy knelt beside the bed and placed a trembling hand on his paw. "You kept me alive," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." She stayed with him for hours, her fingers never leaving his fur. No more silence. Not anymore. Across the state, the fallout was just beginning. The Monarch files had been authenticated. The footage from the cabin was everywhere. Environmental crimes, human trafficking, chemical cover-ups, disappearances. And a girl once listed as dead was very much alive. Ivy Quinn. She testified before the federal inquiry panel, voice steady, though hands shook beneath the table. She told them about the lab, the shack, the blood, the chains, the man who said she would vanish and no one would ask why. She told them about her parents and what they died trying to expose. She did not cry. But in the back row, Aiden did. The FBI swept in fast. Timberline's top brass were indicted. Several board members arrested trying to flee the country, files destroyed, servers wiped. But not before Aiden's dead-drop backups found their way into the right hands. The Department of Justice called it one of the largest corporate conspiracy cases of the decade. Public outrage spread like fire. But it was the image that went viral that changed everything. A girl in a hospital hallway, curled against a battered German shepherd, her fingers laced through his fur, eyes closed in peace, not pain. It wasn't just proof of survival. It was proof of love. Aiden was cleared of all charges. The man once painted as a rogue ex-agent turned out to be the one who saved the truth. They offered him protection, relocation, medals. He declined all of it. He didn't need a new life. He was finally ready to live the one he'd earned. Outside the recovery center, people gathered, not in protest this time, but in support. Posters with Cairo's face, handwritten letters, toy donations, dog treats stacked like offerings at a shrine. Someone left a sign, "You didn't just save her, you saved us." Ivy stood at the window and watched them. Her hand rose to the glass as if touching the crowd from behind the pane. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Behind her, Cairo shifted in his bed. Aiden looked up from the corner, a rare smile playing at the edges of his mouth. "You ready for what comes next?" he asked. Ivy turned. There was a glint in her eye, not just of survival, but of purpose. "Let's make sure it doesn't happen again," she said. Her voice didn't waver. Not anymore. The valley had changed. Where once there was only rot and ruin, now stood a wide field lined with cedar cabins, a greenhouse, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Ranger Haven, for those who were forgotten." Morning dew clung to the wild grass as the sun climbed over the ridge. Laughter floated through the air, soft, unpolished, still learning how to be free. Children ran along the edge of the field, some barefoot, some still limping through healing steps. Among them were dogs of every shape and size, some with 3 legs, some still scarred. But every single one of them wore the same bright orange collar with the initials R.H. At the heart of it all stood Ivy, a year older, a lifetime stronger. She sat cross-legged on the ground, surrounded by a half-circle of younger kids, each with a crayon in hand, each drawing something they feared, and then something they loved. "Okay," she said, voice patient but steady. "Now tell me the story of your picture. What happened? And what changed?" A boy named Lucas held up his page on the left, a black shape with sharp teeth. On the right, a brown mutt curled beside a bed. "This was the man who used to yell," Lucas said. "But now I have Peanut. He sleeps next to me." Ivy nodded, and for a moment her hand hovered over her own page. It showed two figures, a girl with tangled hair, a dog with a scar over his ribs. On the back she had written 3 words: "We came back." Up the hill, Aidan stood near the old barn that now served as an infirmary and training shelter. He was no longer running. His beard was fuller, his shoulders relaxed. His eyes no longer scanned every horizon like a threat waited behind it. But the soldier hadn't disappeared. He'd just settled into something gentler. He adjusted the wooden sign by the fence post, refastening the letters carved by the kids themselves. Trust, heal, belong. A shadow passed beside him. Cairo, still limping slightly, fur grayer around the muzzle, but alive. The shepherd moved like a sentinel, now equal parts companion and protector. A few of the newer kids had already started calling him Commander. Aidan knelt and rubbed behind the dog's ear. "You ready for another day of duty, old man?" Cairo gave a low woof in response, his tail thudding once against the grass. In the main cabin, photos lined the walls, some new, some salvaged. At the center was a large framed shot, Ivy holding a leash, 3 kids beside her, and Cairo sitting proud in front of them. Underneath, burned into the wood, "Family isn't what you're born with. It's what you build when no one else comes." Later that evening, Ivy sat on the front porch, sketchbook open on her lap. Stars blinked awake overhead. Aidan stepped out beside her, coffee in hand, and sat without a word. He didn't need to ask what she was drawing. He could tell from the way her pencil slowed near the eyes. Her parents again. She still couldn't remember everything. But enough had come back, enough to know they had fought to protect others long before she could understand why. "They'd be proud," Aidan said quietly. "I hope so," she whispered, then looked at him. "I'm proud of us." A pause. Then, "Is it okay to be happy now?" The question held no shame, just curiosity, like a child asking if spring would really come after such a long winter. Aidan reached over and gently squeezed her shoulder. "It's more than okay," he said. "It's what they wanted for you." At dusk, they gathered in the clearing. Children, dogs, volunteers from nearby towns, survivors and newcomers alike. Ivy read aloud the names of every dog and child who had entered the sanctuary in the last year. Each name was followed by the lighting of a lantern, released into the sky. Tiny beacons floating toward the stars. Cairo stood beside her as she finished. The last name on the list, Ivy Quinn, returned. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled without sorrow in it. The morning held its breath. Mist still clung to the edges of the trees like the woods were unsure if it should let the sunlight in. The wind was gentle, just enough to ruffle the fur on Cairo's back and the loose strands of hair tucked behind Ivy's ear. They sat beneath the old pine tree at the top of the ridge. Aidan, Ivy, Cairo. No alarms, no maps, no weapons, just the quiet weight of being here alive together. Aidan leaned back against the trunk, boots crossed, eyes half-lidded from a rare kind of peace that didn't ask to be explained. Ivy sat beside him, knees drawn to her chest, sketchbook resting unused in her lap. Cairo lay with his body between them, chest rising in a slow rhythm that felt like a lullaby. The world had changed, and so had they. Below, the sanctuary moved like a memory caught in slow motion. A girl with braids helped a boy tie a bandage around a stuffed animal's paw. Two teenagers were painting a mural of a dog with wings. The greenhouse sparkled with fresh water and hope. No one called, no one cried, just wind, just birds, just breath. Ivy's fingers reached out and traced the edge of Cairo's chest, right where the scar cut across his ribs. Her hand was small, still healing from all the fists she used to clench. But now it rested gently, deliberately. She leaned in, forehead nearly touching the dog's. "You saved me first," she whispered. Cairo's eyes didn't open, but his ears shifted, as if he didn't need sound to understand, because he had always known. Aiden glanced at her, then looked away, not out of discomfort, but respect, like witnessing something sacred, too fragile for interruption, the kind of moment you don't photograph, the kind you memorize with your heart. The silence stretched, not heavy, but full, like a breath held just before saying, "I love you," or just after hearing it said. A silence between heartbeats, between past and future. Ivy finally rested her head on Cairo's side, listening to the steady thump of his heart. She didn't cry. Not this time. There were no more monsters in her closet. No more voices that told her she was just a number in a folder labeled Lost. Here, in this stillness, she was only Ivy, just Ivy, and that was more than enough. Aiden leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze distant. "I used to think silence meant failure," he said, "like I wasn't doing enough, protecting enough, speaking enough." He paused. Cairo shifted his weight, but didn't move. "But this," he added, voice barely above a breath, "this kind of silence, it's what I never knew I was fighting for." Ivy smiled not with her mouth, but with something softer behind her eyes. "We earned it," she said. Minutes passed. No one timed them. No one needed to. Because sometimes healing doesn't roar. It rests. It breathes. It simply is. When the first rays of sun broke fully through the trees, Cairo finally stood, stiff but proud. He moved beside Ivy and nudged her with his snout until she stood too. Aiden rose last, dusting off his jacket, glancing down at them with something close to reverence. They didn't say where they were going. They didn't need to, because when you walk forward from the worst of what the world tried to do to you, when you survive together, when you build something that lasts, even the quiet becomes sacred. They walked back down the ridge step by step toward the sanctuary they had built not just with hands but with pain and truth and the kind of love that doesn't ask to be earned. And somewhere behind them, the morning exhaled. In a world often scarred by silence, fear, and betrayal, stories like Ivy's remind us of the quiet strength found in loyalty, in second chances, and in the unwavering love between humans and animals. Cairo, brave, wounded, and steadfast, was not just a dog, but a lifeline, a protector, a soul who saw without needing words. German shepherds like Cairo are more than working dogs. They are companions with hearts tuned to our pain and instincts born to heal. Through the darkest woods and harshest trials, it wasn't violence that won, but trust, compassion, and the refusal to give up on one another. This story is a tribute to survivors, to those who carry scars but still choose to love. It's a call to cherish the voiceless, to protect what's vulnerable, and to believe that even after unthinkable cruelty, healing is possible. May we all remember that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, the touch of a hand, the loyalty of a dog, the courage to speak, can light a path out of the deepest shadow. And may we build a world where no child and no creature ever feels forgotten again. Because love, in its truest form, is the quiet between heartbeats, and it never leaves.